Hello, you're listening to Democracy Watch, the News Collective's weekly news report, bringing you alternative and undercovered current affairs from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. My name is Alex DeBoer.
I'm Armand Rana.
I'm Joshua Azizi.
And I'm Ben Nelson. It's Friday, September 12th at 5:02 p.m. We're broadcasting from UBC's Vancouver campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hankaminam-speaking Musqueam people.
It's now officially the federal election period, as everyone knows. So from now until the election takes place on October 21st, CiTR News will be bringing you Canadian election coverage through a local Vancouver lens. So today, you're going to hear interviews with two local activists and organizers. We spoke with Ishmael Bhuiyan and Sam Dharmadali. I hope I pronounced that right. Both are supporting Dharmadala. Yeah. Okay. My apologies for the pronunciation. Both organizers are supporting campaigns in Vancouver's Granville riding, currently held by Jody Wilson-Raybould. You've probably heard her name before. After that, we have an interview with City Councillor Christine Boyle. Christine talks about why she voted against the recent rezoning in Marpole, which passed narrowly yesterday. But first, we have local headlines.
On Monday, the Vancouver Aquarium held a welcome party for Tazlina, a 5-month-old rescued northern sea otter pup. She was found in April by fishermen near Anchor Point, Alaska. With her umbilical cord attached, she could not have been more than a day old. After being brought into the Alaska Sea Life Center, she was taught skills that are usually taught by otter mothers, such as what to eat and how to groom herself. Last Friday, Tazlina was transported to the Vancouver Aquarium, where she is currently adapting to her new home. Due to the level of human contact required to rehabilitate this orphan sea otter pup, Tazlina was deemed non-releasable. Eventually, she will be introduced to the other otters at the aquarium.
This Sunday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., the Huntington Society of Canada is hosting their 22nd annual walk in Vancouver, which is Huntington Heroes themed. This is in honor of all the caregivers, people affected by Huntington's disease, social workers, researchers, physicians, and many more. People are encouraged to dress as their favorite superhero, fictional or real. Free superhero masks will be given to the first 150 people there. The event will take place at the Milton Wong Plaza in Olympic Village. The registration of $15 includes Triple O's lunch, and your name will be entered into a draw. Prizes include a Legacy Liquor $350 gift certificate, a $300 family portrait session, and many others. These will be won from the draw and silent auction. Family activities include live music, face painting, a balloon lady, and a comedic entertainer. More information, registration, and fundraising can be found at hscevents.ca/BCWalk.
Nice.
All right, now for some sports news. The Ultimate Fighting Championship, or the UFC, comes to Vancouver this Saturday at Rogers Arena. Canadian fans are rooting for local competitor Cole Smith, who is from Squamish. Smith is also affiliated with the Sound Martial Arts Gym that is also in Squamish. Smith is fighting in his second UFC tilt, which is what UFC fights are called, having won his previous fight against Mitch Gagnon in Ottawa. The fight is part of the UFC's bantamweight division, meant for fighters between 126 and 135 pounds. His opponent is American fighter Miles Johns. This is Johns' first ever fight in the UFC, and it will be made even tougher to have the entire crowd against him. Both fighters are undefeated in their professional fighting careers, with Cole Smith seen at 7-0-0 and Johns at 9-0-0. Something will have to give between the two. Smith, who is also referred to by fans as the Cole Train, is set on becoming the top UFC fighter in the nation. Hopefully, he gets closer to that goal with a victory this Saturday.
Thanks, Ben. So now we get to our federal election coverage.
Ooh.
Yes, the first feature. So in our first feature, left-wing radical voters and activists in Vancouver's Granville riding are faced with an interesting choice in this election. The current incumbent, as we mentioned on the top of the show, is former Attorney General and now independent candidate Jody Wilson-Raybould. The major candidates running against her in the riding are the Liberals' Talib Nur Mohammed the Green Party's Louise Boutin, Conservative Zach Siegel, and the NDP candidate Yvonne Hanson. So some people are supporting Jody Wilson-Raybould given her recent role in the SNC-Lavalin affair, which you've all heard a lot about. This involved her standing up to Trudeau and corporate corruption, while other voters in the riding are likely persuaded by the young housing and environmental activist Yvonne Hanson with the NDP. And the NDP has traditionally been the home of kind of the furthest left voters within kind of the mainstream spectrum in Canada. So we're not including fringe parties here. Yeah.
So we spoke to two local activists on the left to find out their perspectives on this choice and what it means to be left-wing or radical. The first interview we're going to hear is with Sam Darmadella, an executive member of Vancouver Coalition of Progressive Electors, or COPE, as well as being a member and organizer with the VTU. Sam was a whistleblower while working for the Sahodas, who have been found guilty of several bylaw violations at the Balmoral and Regent hotels. So Sam is now supporting Jody Wilson-Raybould in this election, and he'll explain why. You posted a statement on Facebook saying that the NDP's candidate in the Vancouver Granville riding, Yvonne Hanson, is helping to stop Jody Wilson-Raybould from getting elected as an independent. As a member of COPE's leadership and as a self-avowed socialist, why do you support a candidate who has consistently supported somewhat centrist policies on the federal level, like Jody Wilson-Raybould, over a climate and housing activist on the left, like Yvonne Hanson?
Yeah, but it's a good question. Actually, when I'm doing politics, I really like to do in the radical politics. But the problem is always people thinking left-wing people thinking radical politics is a belong to them. No. Right-wing person can be a radical too. So I think Jody Wilson is the most radical politician to me in this country. I don't really see any very big difference between Canada major big parties, NDP, Liberals, or these two parties. Like I don't think it's a big difference. So if I find any real good socialist candidate, of course I'm going to stand up for the socialist candidate. So for this situation, I think I'm going to stand up for Jody Wilson, and because she have more chance to win too.
So in your view, how should a candidate's identity factor into why voters choose to vote or not vote for them?
Sorry, can you ask me again? I don't
Yeah,
get it.
no problem. How important is who a candidate is in terms of like them being a person of color or them being, part of a certain religion or them being part of a certain minority to whether or not a person should vote for them?
Yeah, so, okay, my point of view, I'm color person. I'm immigrant, color person, marginalized community in this country. I'm always, I'm looking at the problem, my vision always, no matter what, I'm looking through my marginalized view, right? So in this case, Jody Wilson, actually, I'm very, very important to me because she's a First Nation woman. And also, I'm very connected with the First Nation families because I have a very good connection with them. I always like First Nation people connect with the system, but I feel like they are kind of rejected. They are not in the system. So it's another one of the reasons I like Jody Wilson because she's marginalized First Nation woman. So I think that from my side, maybe in Canada, is not really caring that side, but as a marginalized person, I really care. I like marginalized persons. They are working in the system.
So on that point of marginalized communities, for example, Jody Wilson-Raybould recently publicly supported a motion before council to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel as being anti-Semitic. If international human rights and Palestinian rights was a major concern for you as a voter, in your mind, would it be justified to not support Jody Wilson-Raybould?
No, actually, that one actually with my community, my friends, we always talk about that issue. But right now we do this is the Canada federal election, right? So I'm not really caring what her international view about the Palestine. So I'm not. It's not really matter to me.
Okay, yeah. So the national politics of her being an Indigenous woman matters more than her outlook on international human rights.
Yeah.
Okay. So on September 8th, Sarah Sagai, a fellow member of COPE's leadership, posted a statement on Facebook, just a short statement with a graphic saying how the NDP running a candidate in Granville is likely to block Jody Wilson-Raybould from being reelected. And a lot of comments were written below the post. And the very last comment reads, "This is the problem with solidarity on the left, the real left. It is so fragile. It falls apart at the slightest push from identity politics." How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so I know who posted this one. That one of NDP member post that post. Yeah, it can be. This is the real problem in the left politics. Left politics always try to argue. I'm kind of agree with that point. Yeah,
Yeah, you kind of agree with it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Yes, that's the nature of the left politics. So we're doing nothing left politics, I guess.
So is there any kind of solution for that? Or do you just see this as the inevitable condition of the left?
No, it's not going. Nobody going to find the solution. Last 200 years, that's the nature of the left. Left always fighting, always argue. Maybe that's why I like left.
So part of your support, you even mentioned earlier that you think Jody Wilson-Raybould is more likely to win, and this is based on polling that shows that Jody Wilson-Raybould and Talib Noor Mohammed are the two candidates in the lead, and then Yvonne is quite a bit behind. So your support seems to be based partly in strategic voting. Do you always support strategic voting over voting by your conscience?
So now, okay, you're asking, maybe you mean like a liberal running also color person? And
so, for example, if someone was interested in both Jody Wilson-Raybould and Yvonne Hanson, but they looked at the polls and saw that likely the person to win would either be Jody Wilson-Raybould or Noor Mohammed, the Liberal candidate. And so you would suggest they vote for Jody Wilson-Raybould as opposed to the NDP candidate, because, like, if they're on the left, because only one of those two candidates will win. Does that make sense? So that's like strategic voting.
Yeah. So I think okay. So.
So do you support strategic voting most of the time? Like, is that something that you think makes sense?
No, at this case, yes.
In this case, right, but not always.
No, that depends my political view at that time. So I think this situation, yeah. So I support in that way.
Okay, but then, for example, if candidates, say on the municipal level, like I know the by-election has been brought up a lot in comments online with, COPE and one city, right? Splitting the vote on the left and such. You think it made sense for two parties on the left to run against more conservative candidates in other municipal parties? And in that case, people should have voted by conscience versus voted strategically?
Yes, that case was actually, if you look at the election results, we can understand very easy because Jean Swanson lost because of the, I can say because of the one-seat candidate. So I'm not blaming to Green candidate because the green vote is not our left vote. Green vote is I believe that's kind of right-wing vote. So yeah.
Okay, so it just depends on the situation. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Yeah.
I'd like you to define a term for us, and we've discussed a lot these two terms. There's a term of left and radical. And so what positions a person on the left, and how is that different from being a radical?
okay, left politics meaning what I believe is based on social equality. But radical politics meaning is not don't have to be only just left, because always left-wing people think radical politics belong to left. No, right-wing person can be a radical. So that's what happened in the Liberal Party. Jody Wilson, she's the most radical to me. So, so that's the way I'm looking at the left-wing and radical.
So what does radical mean?
Radical, for my view, radical meaning person who fighting against machine, person who fighting against system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this person can be a right-wing person, that can be a left-wing person.
Mm. Yeah, it seems like as time goes on, we add more and more spectrums to how we position candidates. You know, it's not just left to right. It becomes also the spectrum of radical to not radical. And then on the local level, there's urbanist versus conservationist. So I guess that's just another line in the sort of graph of how you position candidates.
Yeah, and another very important thing too, I want to say, in Canada, if you look at all the big party, I don't think any candidate can be a radical under party umbrella. If someone tries radical, he's good to go. Look at the NDP nomination process. People get kicked out over a small Facebook post.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. If somebody wants radical, he need to be independent.
Right. So do you think in another riding, for example, if there was an NDP candidate versus an independent candidate, would you be more likely to really consider that independent candidate?
No, not exactly. Actually, I want to see who's that independent candidate. If an independent candidate like Jody Wilson or First Nation, of course, or color person, of course, I going to take that side.
Okay.
I was just wondering, you were a whistleblower in the past. Do you feel some sort of personal, like you identify with Jody because she was also a whistleblower in some way? And does that play into your support for her?
Exactly. Maybe that's the one reason I always like people who fighting against the bosses. Good way. Yeah, maybe actually you are correct.
Yeah, see a bit of yourself in her.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Sam.
All right, Alex.
So you
All
can.
right, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay. You too.
Okay,
Bye.
take care. Bye.
Hi, Sam. So on September 1st, you posted
Hello, and we're back. So you're listening to Democracy Watch. If you just tuned in on CiTR 101.9 FM, we just heard an interview done by myself, Alex DeBoer, and News Collective comrade Armand Reyna, and it was done with local activist and organizer Sam Dharmdilla, whose name I may be mispronouncing, and I'm so sorry, Sam.
So just for some context on what we heard in terms of the recent polling in the Granville riding, a Main Street research poll for iPolitics from August 27th to 28th had Liberal Nur Mohammed leading with 29% of support, with Jody Wilson-Raybould close behind at 26%. Conservative candidate Zach Siegel was at 15%, and Green Louise Boutin at 9.2%. And NDP candidate Yvonne Hanson was at 7.3%. So that's quite a bit behind. And Of course, it's still early days, and given the highly unique dynamics of this race with so many viable candidates and national interest and an independent incumbent, it can be really difficult to predict well. And like one thing I saw was that, Nur Mohammed's doing really well with young voters.
Right.
And so like it's not necessarily the case that Yvonne Hanson is competing with Jody Wilson-Raybould only. She could also be competing with Nur Mohammed. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, so just to put that in context, like because Talib Nur Mohammed, the Liberal candidate, is leading with 28%, and then Wilson-Raybould has 26%. So like what we were saying in that interview, if it wasn't clear, is that those two are the leaders in the riding, and because we have a first past the post system, it only matters who gets the most votes. So that's sort of part of the argument Sam is making is like, well, like Yvonne Hanson isn't going to win. So you may as well, she has more in common with Jody Wilson than Noor Mohammed or Wilson-Raybould, sorry. So, but again, does she? Like, I don't know. It is kind of unclear what Wilson-Raybould's politics are now that she's an independent. And again, like Armand just said, this is early polling. And because also Wilson-Raybould went from a Liberal to an independent, like it's hard to rely on the data from the previous election because it's no longer as applicable.
Yeah, it's just harder to model, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Based on there's so many different candidates, like viable candidates running.
Yeah.
It's like a three-way race. It's harder to model.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna jump in here actually.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
Oh yeah, sorry. Was my mic not on?
Yeah, it wasn't. My apologies.
I feel so excluded, Alex. Anyways, I
personal,
actually just pulled
Josh.
up a more recent poll here.
Oh yeah.
Albeit from a different polling company that actually has Wilson-Raybould up by 10 points.
And when was that from?
September 5th.
Okay, yeah, because the iPolitics graph that people had been posting on social media on Facebook was from August 28th.
Mm-hmm.
So, now Wilson-Raybould's ahead in the races.
This is from Justice and Polling. It's posted on September 5th. It has Wilson-Raybould ahead at 37%, with the Liberal candidate at 27%, Conservative at 15%, Green at 12%, and NDP at 6%.
Okay. Well, polls. Who knows?
Polls.
Yeah.
You never know, but thank you for that update.
They're always weird.
Yeah.
All right, Armand, do you want to introduce our next interview?
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks for that, Josh. All right. So let's go to our second interview on Vancouver's Granville riding. Myself and Alex interviewed a UBC student who's a housing activist, organizer, and VTU and COPE member, Ishmael Bouyan. Ishmael is campaigning for NDP candidate Yvonne Hanson. Let's take a listen to understand why. Are you a member of COPE?
I am a member of COPE, yes.
Okay, and so you're a member of COPE and someone firmly situated in the left, having supported and led a number of left or progressive socioeconomic causes at a young age, as you just mentioned. In this federal election, you've chosen to back and campaign for Yvonne Hanson, the NDP candidate in Vancouver's Granville riding. I'm wondering why, with your values, why you chose to support Yvonne over Jody Wilson-Raybould, who is an Indigenous woman with a record of standing up to the Prime Minister and big industry and forgoing her security in the Liberal Party to act her conscience.
So I'm a huge fan of Jody Wilson-Raybould. I remember just cheering her on. I was sitting at Brock Hall actually watching the testimony with my headphones in and feeling pure elation because of what she was doing. It was historic. But I also know Yvonne Hanson personally. She's an extraordinary candidate. And I think she represents something that's very particular to this moment in history. Simultaneously, in both the States and in Canada, I think we're in this beautiful transition phase between establishment corporate politicians and young and sometimes old, in the case of Bernie Sanders, socialists who are the new guard of their respective parties, whichever those vehicles are. It's the Democratic Party in the States, and I think right now it's the New Democratic Party in Canada, but they're taking over this kind of moderate party in both cases and transforming it. And Yvonne fits very neatly into this new guard here in Canada. And other people also fit into this category. People like Leah Gazan, Diana Yoon, Sven Robinson, who's back on the political scene, Breen Willett, Matthew Green. These are people who are transforming Canadian politics. And I think climate change has a big part to play in this. 350 Canada on Sunday released a list of their endorsed candidates who are champions of the Green New Deal. And a lot of these candidates who are proud and open socialists are on that. and all but 2 of the candidates are NDP candidates that they've endorsed. So I don't think that the NDP is perfect. I've been very critical of the NDP, but there are people within the NDP now who represent this exciting, insurgent, radical new guard that are plugged into social movements in their own areas, like Yvonne is, but are also leading the charge for radical policies like a wealth tax and pharmacare for all and a Green New Deal on a federal level.
Right. So it sounds like what you're saying is that the things you just mentioned aren't policies that Jody Wilson-Raybould is fighting for. So it's a sort of a political decision you've made based on political policies, things that Yvonne is standing for that Jody Wilson-Raybould isn't, and that's why you've chosen to support who you have.
Yeah, and again, I have tremendous respect for Jody Wilson-Raybould and have tremendous respect for the people who are supporting her. But I have a fundamental difference in my ideology with Jody Wilson-Raybould. She's a Liberal, and she's been very open about that. She's consistently voted with the Liberal Party. She's stood with their stances. And another thing that might be a timeline issue, but she actually isn't running on any particular policies. If you go to her website, there's no substance there, and that's an issue for me. And I think that, again, this campaign that Yvonne is running has nothing to do with attacking Jody Wilson-Raybould. It's about criticizing the Liberal record and the corporate establishment, Ivy League educated tech executive technocrat that's running in that riding from the Liberal Party, who would just be horrible for that party, or for the riding.
Right. Off of that point, so Tlaib Nur Mohammed is the Liberal candidate. And so, according to the most recent polling, the 2 leading candidates in that riding are Jody Wilson-Raybould, who's running as an independent this time, and then Tlaib Nur Mohammed, who's running as a Liberal candidate. So if those 2 are kind of neck and neck and most likely to win, do you think it's reasonable for people to ask the NDP not to run a candidate?
Well, I think that there's this false attribution of blame to people who are locally organizing for Yvonne Hanson for splitting the vote, because the NDP would have run a candidate no matter what in this riding.
Is that a policy? Like they outright always run a candidate?
I'm sure that it's a policy for the Green Party, but I don't know for sure if it's an NDP policy. But the Green Party is still running a candidate. Her name is Louise Boutin. She's run several times in both federal and provincial elections. But the NDP would have run a candidate anyway. And so a bunch of us thought that it best be someone who is bold and will push the party in the right decisions and bring policies like the wealth tax, pharmacare for all, and the Green New Deal forward in this riding.
So on that point, two things. First of all, recently we had the example where Jagmeet Singh was running in South Burnaby, and to my knowledge, the Green Party chose not to run a candidate against him, if I recall correctly. And so why couldn't the NDP have made a similar decision in this case? And secondly, what is your view about strategic voting and voting your conscience? Do you see a dichotomy there? Do you see strategic voting has some sort of utility at some points?
So to your first question, there might be a difference between election law and by-elections and general elections, but I'm also not an elections law expert, so I don't want to make any claims on that. That would be something that I'd have to do some research on. But on your second question about strategic voting, I think there are a lot of traps in strategic voting. One of the things that strategic voting does is it has long-term impacts on how we are restricted in our ability to critique the elected. So let's say we elect a kind of like a safest choice candidate like Trudeau, or in Vancouver, Kennedy Stewart. There's this really egregious and frustrating tendency on the left to stifle any criticism of that person in the fear that somehow the right will take advantage of it, which is so problematic. A lot of people on the left and on the progressive side of things in Canada have been reluctant to critique Trudeau. And we see that a lot, this kind of like fawning over Trudeau, even though he's had a very problematic record. And a very similar thing's happening in Vancouver right now. Kennedy Stewart isn't being criticized nearly enough. He's seeking an injunction. Seems to be in the process of seeking an injunction to displace homeless people from a park even though they don't have any housing or nowhere better to go. It's despicable. But there doesn't seem to be backlash from the left. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that we've kind of accepted that there's this mold of a politician that's the best it can get. But I think that people like Yvonne Hanson and Sven Robinson are challenging that and showing us that we can have politicians who stand with the people in the working class and aren't traditional, conventional politicians.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point you make. And a part of the reason I think that there's this idea that this is the best it can get or this is the lesser of two evils is because we have a party system. And I know people have been critical of this party system, especially at the federal level, because of party discipline, saying that, well, the NDP isn't really that different than the Liberals because everyone votes the same. So there isn't really room for people to vote their conscience the way Jody Wilson-Raybould will be able to as an independent. So I'm just wondering, do you see Canada's party system as a necessary evil, like this is just the way it is? Or in an ideal world, would you prefer that there were no parties so that MPs were all independent and able to vote how they wanted?
Two things on that. The first thing is that I think for assessing whether parties are effective, we have to kind of look at the structure of the party as it currently stands. Let's take the example of the NDP. My answer would have been more sympathetic to independency in 2015 under Tom Mulcair. The NDP was not a very progressive party. They took a lot of centrist stances. People like Sven Robinson and Yvonne Hanson would not have been able to run under Tom Mulcair as leader. But the NDP has evolved a lot in the past few years. Jagmeet Singh has been a lot more sympathetic to the socialist wing of the party. And it's great to see.
But do you see like party discipline, people, MPs having to vote the same way? Do you see that as problematic or necessary because people generally vote for a party and they represent X, Y, and Z, so they should know what to expect?
Well, I think that there's a lot of tweaking to do within how parties work. I'm not a fan of the whip system, but I'm also questioning my stance against the whip system with the Green Party fiasco that's going on. It's actually pretty ridiculous that there are people who praise the Conservative Party within the Canadian Greens who are against abortion on the Canadian Greens. It's appalling. So I think there are certain stances that the party has to be have kind of a unified stance on, but there are other issues that there should be more diversity.
So on September 8th, Sarah Sagai, a fellow member of COPE's leadership, posted a statement on Facebook saying that the NDP running a candidate in the Granville riding is a threat to Jody Wilson-Raybould's re-election. A lot of heated comments were written below this post. The very last one reads, "This is a problem with solidarity on the left, the real left. It is so fragile. It falls apart at the slightest push from identity politics." How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to clarify the record. I'm actually not on the leadership of COPE. I'm a member and a supporter of COPE among other politicians in the city who aren't necessarily members of COPE. But I also have a lot of respect for people like Sarah who are taking a different stance on this issue. Obviously, we're all still friends. But it's a difficult thing. It's difficult to reconcile this like spectacle in this of Jody Wilson-Raybould and standing up to like the Canadian establishment and like the white male Trudeau state with just her politics. This is a personal level. I'm not on a personal level. I'm not talking on behalf of the campaign now. But I remember earlier she came out in support of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism at City Hall, and that was disturbing to me. The BCCLA was against that definition as well, and so it was a regressive stance to take on an issue. Charlie Smith a few months ago wrote an article in the Georgia Straight which was entitled something like 10 questions we should be asking Jody Wilson-Raybould, which was a deeper look into her record as Attorney General, taking some regressive stances there. So I think that we have to be critical of politicians no matter what they've done. They're people whose records need to be scrutinized, and that that applies to Jody Wilson-Raybould, it applies to Jagmeet Singh, it applies to Yvonne Hanson. So I think that while they're not, these two forces aren't mutually exclusive, we can think of Jody Wilson-Raybould as a Canadian hero, which I definitely do, but also be critical of her record and her stances.
Yeah, we were going to ask you about that. Jody Wilson-Raybould's public support of the International Holocaust Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism. What would you say to Canadians who say it doesn't matter what her stance is on international politics or human rights in Israel and Palestine? Like, why does that matter to Canadian voters?
Well, I think that I'm just against only caring about our country. The people in Palestine matter as much to me as the people here in Canada. Like, I don't have a particular attachment to this random person in Ontario more than a person in Palestine. It just doesn't really make much sense to me. So I was disturbed by that. But also, it's just she's openly a liberal and I'm not, right?
Yeah. So with the post Sarah made on September 8th, you wrote that Jody Wilson-Raybould is an incredible person and leader, as you've been saying throughout this interview, and you admire her as a Canadian hero. But at the same time, a lot of her supporters are problematic, you said, and they're the ones who organize on the local level and influence people in the riding more directly. So it's interesting to think about this idea of representative politics, right? Because we have the candidate as representative, but also the people behind them. So I'm wondering, how much should voters care about the people behind the candidate as opposed to the candidate themselves?
I think you've touched on a very interesting question, and I'm going to draw back to the States because everything's magnified, and I think it's very easy to learn lessons from. I think it was 538 or some of the statistics think tanks in the States came up with a graphic comparing the demographics of Bernie Sanders supporters versus Elizabeth Warren supporters, both progressives widely thought to be the furthest left of any of the candidates running for president. Bernie Sanders was wildly popular among poor people, among people of color, among women, whereas Elizabeth Warren represented kind of the educated class, people, a vast majority of college and university professors were Elizabeth Warren supporters and donors, whereas Bernie Sanders had like the teachers and the working class blue-collared workers. And I think that's very important to me because Bernie Sanders his responsibility would be to represent these working class people who are underrepresented, right? It's important because he's beholden to them, this like blue-collar, underrepresented class of America that's unheard on the political scene. And that's why I'm a Bernie supporter. And that's why I think it's important. There's a lot to be learned from the people who support a candidate. And there's a lot to be predicted about what that candidate will behave like when they're elected based on the people who support them. But I think there needs to be some level of separation between the supporter and the candidate. It's not necessarily always the case, but I do think it matters.
Yeah, and I mean, politicians are elected to literally represent their constituents. So,
on that topic of representation, one thing that comes to mind is that, candidates also have their own identity, and the campaign and their supporters also have an identity. What role do you think a voter should, or emphasis a voter should put on the candidate's identity when making a determination about who to vote for?
So identity is like race?
Yeah, race, class, occupation, gender, religion.
It's an interesting question. I was listening to a Cornell West podcast this morning, and he was talking about how there was this rise in pride in America after Barack Obama's election. But it was great at the time, but there's a difference between representation and justice. You can be represented at the upper echelons of society, and that's great. But if there aren't structural changes at the bottom, it doesn't mean anything. But it's also important that people are represented. I think can I swear? I think it's really amazing that Jagmeet Singh is the leader of the NDP. It's actually quite extraordinary that a turban-wearing person who's like open about the religion, even though it's like an easy target for horrible people, that he's the leader of one of the most powerful political organizations in North America. But I also think there's a distinction to be made about like what these people are fighting for.
So lastly, we were just wondering if you could define for us a couple terms. So the first is left, like what situates someone on the left. And then the second is radical. What makes a candidate radical?
Oh, heavy questions. I think that the biggest factor that like I immediately see when deciding if someone's on the left or not is if they're working for the working class. I think that's the most traditional definition of the left, if they're beholden to the working class. That's the simplest definition that I can give you. And radical. See, I've taken courses in botany and know a lot about plants, but radical is a part of the root of a plant. And I think that's really beautiful that like the definition of radical is getting to the root of a problem as well in English. And that's how I define radical, is really digging into the things that you need. My political hero is Jean Swanson, and she has this saying that's, you can't get what you want unless you ask for what you need. And I think my definition of radical is identifying what's needed and going and getting it. In the case of the Green New Deal, it's identifying what targets we have to reach to save our planet and people who are vulnerable. In the case of the wealth tax, it's identifying the need to tax the hell out of the ruling class. And in the case of pharmacare, it's identifying the need that it's ridiculous that people have to pay for medications that they need to stay alive in this country.
Well, thank you so much, Ishmael. It's been great having you here in studio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, ahoy, ahoy!
Ahoy, mateys! Feeling lost at sea? Well, don't fret. From September the 16th to the 20th, CiTR is running Degree Navigator to get you acquainted with some great local bands. Get your timbers shivered at the station every day at 12 p.m. with Vancouver's most trusty stars. On Monday is Nice Apple, Tuesday, Christina Sheldon, Wednesday, Parlor Panther, Thursday, Harley Small, and Friday, Sigh. Come by to get your sea legs in the vast ocean of local music. The booty will be bountiful if you consider new knowledge about what's happening off campus booty. And in case you don't speak cat, on Friday, September 20th, CiTR Discorder, UBC Film Society, and the Blank Vinyl Project are all joining forces to bring you Cool Cat Chit Chat. It's a fall mingler and listening party hosted by UBC's 3 coolest clubs. It's free, fun, and all ages. Come by the Hatch Gallery in the Nest on Friday, September 20th from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. to chit and chat with some cool cats.
Welcome back. You're listening to Democracy Watch on CiTR 101.9 FM. We just heard a feature on the Vancouver Granville riding.
Up next, we have a segment on the somewhat controversial rezoning at 8636 8656 Oak Street, which is in Marpole. That vote took place last night, or yesterday afternoon, I guess. News Collective member Joshua Zizi, who's in studio with us now.
Hey, Alex.
Hello, Josh. He interviewed City Councillor Christine Boyle this afternoon about her decision not to support the rezoning. So, Josh, can you tell us a bit about what's happening with that story?
Sure, Alex. So last night, council narrowly approved the rezoning of 2 apartment buildings in Marpole, which is like kind of a small neighborhood in southern Vancouver around Granville Street, Oak Street, etc.
Bit of a wealthier or middle to upper class neighborhood, would you say?
Definitely more like the middle upper end, I guess. But like following this approval, like these two buildings at 8636 and 8656 on Oak Street will be torn down, and in their place will be two much larger, fancier buildings. The current buildings have a combined total of 43 units, and the new project will have 91 units. So that is that twice as many? Yeah, that's more than twice as many units.
Right.
But they're also at a much steeper price. And currently the average rents in these buildings are $693 for a studio, $768 for a one-bedroom, and this says $1,000 for a two-bedroom, but I think it's actually $1,100. In the new buildings, the proposed average rents will be $1,575 for a studio, $1,875 for a one-bedroom, $2,450 for a two-bedroom, and $3,050 for a three-bedroom. And these new rents are actually cheaper than the average rent around Marpole and a lot of other places in Vancouver, but they're significantly more expensive than the previous rents. And a lot of lower income tenants are likely not going to be able to afford them. The tenants who are currently there, they do have the first right of refusal for these units, meaning that they can essentially call dibs on a similar unit there first.
Right.
And then they'll also get a 30% discount on their new rents. However, according to a city report, only about a third of the building's tenants say they're actually planning to return, which kind of is understandable considering how even with that 30% discount on the new rents are like, for a studio, it's like a $400 rent increase.
Right.
And so this means that, a lot of them are going to have to find new places, which means that the city's recently approved tenant relocation policy will come into play.
The TRPP.
Oh, yeah. So tenants will receive some financial compensation based on the length of their tenancy. They'll get 4 months' notice before they have to go, and then some funds to assist with moving costs. And for lower income tenants, meaning households that make below $30,000 or below $50,000 if they have dependents, the developers have agreed to assist with helping them find a new place in Vancouver. They'll present them with 3 options for new places in the city that best fit their needs. However, for returning tenants, even with that 30% discount, rents are going up a lot, and finding a new affordable place in Vancouver is never easy. And so this rezoning attracted a fair bit of controversy. The Vancouver Tenants Union, which has spoken out against very similar rezonings like this in the past.
Yep.
They had a lot of speakers at City Hall a few days ago, and they held a little rally outside of City Hall as well. And then it was divisive amongst council as well. This only passed with a 5-4 vote. The mayor and another councillor were away. And so earlier today, I spoke with Christine Boyle and asked her why she opposed the rezoning. Shall we play the interview, Alex?
Sure. Where is it?
It is in Programorama.
Where?
Under News Collective 2018-2019. Folks, we're having some technical difficulties.
Yeah, let's go to an ad real quick. But this is... stay tuned. Okay, be right back. CiTR. Starting August 30th, CiTR will be airing the award-winning podcast about Vancouver's overdose crisis, told by drug user activists and supported by research. Crackdown is hosted by celebrated documentarian and longtime drug user Garth Mullins. Catch Crackdown every Friday morning at 8 a.m. here on CiTR 101.9 FM.
We are High School for Recording Arts Los Angeles.
You may have heard about our school in Minnesota, but we started something new and great right here in LA.
HSRA is the new family in town. Our students have created the song Smashing Out to let others feel our energy and to represent the culture HSRA is building.
We all came from different backgrounds, and we're seeking a different form of learning. We found it here at HSRA.
Together, we started a student record label. Smashing Out is the first song we produce.
We also just dropped the music video for this song. It represents our energy, our personalities, and our culture.
You can find us on IG at HSRA_LA, and you can contact me, our student manager, Empress, EMPRESS.Hill01@ubillcharter.org, or reach the school at 320-428-0854. 320-428-0854.
Dream me till I see that HSRA.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is Monday.
From 1 to 3 p.m.
Who is this guy? Does he have a name? Does anybody know where he's from?
From parts unknown
My name's Chris Horrific.
He always wanted his character to be bigger than life.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is, without question, the greatest sports and entertainment event of all time. Be a part of it, Monday
from 1 to 3 p.m.
The Parts Unknown Show on 101.9 CiTR. Sometimes cosmoses collide.
The Parts Unknown!
Ta-ta. Now the patriarchy is dead, and we killed it. If you identify as a woman, femme, trans, or non-binary, CiTR wants you on the air. You can talk about literally whatever you want as long as you care about it. No worries if you have no experience, we'll train you in everything you need to know. Come by CiTR and say hi, hey, hi, hello, from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday to help us never play Led Zeppelin on CiTR 101.9 FM ever again.
All right, and we're back. Sorry for that tech difficulty. We were unable to locate the interview, but we have it now. So we're going to go to an interview Josh did with City Councillor Christine Boyle on yesterday's vote to approve a rezoning in Marpole. Let's take a listen.
It's a good interview, people. Start out with, can you start out by telling me a bit about who you are?
My name is Christine Boyle. I'm a Vancouver City Councillor with One City Vancouver. And it's my first term on council. I ran on a platform of climate action and protecting renters and much more.
Thanks. And so yesterday, September 11th, Council narrowly approved of a rezoning in Marpole at 8636, 8656 Oak Street in a 5-4 vote, and you voted against it. Can you tell me why you voted against this rezoning?
Sure. So I feel like we need more secure rental housing. I've voted in the past for secure rental housing, and I feel really strongly that that new secure rental stock can't come at the expense of existing rental, not at the height of the housing crisis that we're in. And there's plenty of other space in the city where we can and should build this type of rental, where it won't have the level of displacement that the project we were debating yesterday includes. And so I was hoping that this council would draw a line in terms of displacement and in terms of loss of affordable, secure rental stock by not approving that particular building and supporting rental in other areas where there won't be so much displacement.
And I know that other councillors who, like the councillors there who supported the rezoning, like Councillor Carr, for instance, they discussed how factors like the updated tenant relocation and protection policy or the TRPP, how they would assist low-income tenants in finding new affordable housing, and also how tenants would be offered the right of first refusal in the new building with 30% off starting rents. Why don't you think these supports weren't for tenants weren't enough to justify the rezoning here?
So I'm glad that we strengthened our tenant relocation and protection plan. It's better than it was before. I still think it needs to be stronger. The piece that's particularly strong in our current relocation plan is for low-income tenants who have additional supports to make sure they're getting into units. And there are a lot of renters in Vancouver who fall in a kind of low to middle income bracket who for whom the tenant relocation and protection plan doesn't provide as much support, and still it would be really hard for them to find new units at the existing market rents, even with that kind of 30% reduction. So again, I think we need more secure rental stock, and maybe, hopefully, 10 or 15 years down the road, we'll have built more stock and the housing market, the rental market won't be so dire, and then we can look at what does it look like to replace these older buildings in a way that, maybe there's swing housing or something, so we're protecting those tenants well. But the current situation, I think, just doesn't provide enough support and protection for, low and moderate income tenants who are in a pretty tough spot in the city. And so I couldn't support the proposal knowing what a dire circumstance it would put those tenants in.
And I wanted to talk a bit about the details of the updated TRPP as well. So according to the June update, a developer that displaces low-income tenants is required to provide 3 new housing options that best meet the tenant's identified priorities. So for example, if a tenant says my priorities are to get to work within 30 minutes of leaving their house, then I have to find a place that is dog friendly, that my place has a balcony, and it has to be rentable at 30% of their income. For a developer to find a low income tenant a place with all of these priorities, is that even possible to find all these priorities in an expensive city like Vancouver?
I hear pretty mixed reviews on how possible that is. If the tenants are low income enough, then they could be offered a spot through the BC Housing wait list. So that wait list is long, and there are people and families on it who have been waiting years and years on the wait list. I hear anecdotally that some people are able to find a place through relocation specialists. I hear from others they just got emailed a few Craigslist listings, but of course, there's 50 people at an open house for any new rental unit, so it doesn't actually secure them the place. So I'm interested to hear how that requirement is actually playing out and being implemented on the ground. I don't have clear numbers, but my sense is people are having trouble, and we're not able to enforce it as much as would be good for renters.
Are there any changes to the TRPP that you would like to see?
I'd like to see it strengthened in a number of ways, and it's a conversation I'm sure we'll continue to have on council, though it's not an easy one at this council. I mean, there are a number of ways to go about it. I've heard people advocate, and I'd certainly be interested in seeing numbers on suggestions like the returning rent be based on income rather than on the market, which requires renters to share their income. But if renters are able to come back with a first right of refusal at a rent that's 30% of their income or some measurement like that, it's more realistic. Or maybe the compensation that displaced renters get should be based on the market rates for rent rather than just their length of tenancy, because those renters are being sent out into a market that if they've been renting somewhere for 5 or 10 years, the rental market has skyrocketed since then, and so it's tough to find a place. Even if you're getting, $1,000 of compensation, it doesn't go a long way when your rent is going up so significantly. So I still think we can do more, and I hope we keep pushing to do more on it.
And kind of bringing it back to the rezoning of the building in Marble, are there any additional supports or amendments to this rezoning that you would have liked to see that might have led you to support the rezoning?
I'm not sure. I'm very happy to support projects like this where displacement is minimized. So I guess if we were able to offer that these tenants could come back at a rent that's geared to their income, I would have been comfortable with that, though it still leaves them with a couple years while it's being built where they have to find a place. So it's not perfect. I get that we need to renew some of this older rental stock at some point, but first I'd like to see us really build out the availability of secure purpose-built rental in other parts of the city. I think that's our big next step, building rental where there isn't much displacement, and then there's more options for how we go about appropriately and supportively rebuilding older rental buildings as they are coming to the end of their life.
And I've only actually got one more question for you here.
Sure.
And it's kind of about kind of what you were just talking about earlier there. Like one of the challenges that surrounding addressing Vancouver's rental crisis is the issue of, increasing the amount of rental stock without displacing tenants in the process. What do you see as the best way for the city to build more affordable units while trying to mitigate the effects of displacement or evictions while going at it?
So I'd like to see us legalize apartments and rentals across our RS and RT zones, our single-family and duplex zones, so that we're building rental where there isn't currently secure rental that minimizes the amount of people displaced. Occasionally there's someone renting a single-family home and they'd be covered by the TRPP, but those types of sites minimize how much displacement there is. And so I think that's the conversation that we need to be having. I hope that's a conversation we're having in the citywide plan. There's other cities across North America who are talking about legalizing apartments in all neighborhoods. And so that's one piece I will continue to push forward so that we can, as you said, so we can build where we minimize displacement.
And yeah, that's all the questions I got. Is there kind of anything else you wanted to add before I go?
No, that's great. You asked great questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time again.
Yeah, anytime.
Cool. I'll let you know.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
All right. You're listening to Democracy Watch on CiTR 11.9 FM. You just heard an interview that our News Collective member Josh did with Councillor Christine Boyle about the recent rezoning of the 2 apartment buildings, I guess, in Marpole, where a bunch of people are being displaced, low-income tenants. That's our show for today. Tune in again next Thursday at 5. As we mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to have more and more federal election coverage through a local lens. So, Vancouver has 6 ridings. We're going to look at all of them. We're also going to continue to try to pay attention to City Hall because they're back in session now after an August break. So check your podcast feeds. I'll probably throw up most of the content today on our Seeking Office feed. Yeah, and we'll be trying to have more coverage on there for the election. So check it out. Anyway, other than that, thanks for listening. I don't